A simple black woman was laughed at in the chess club, until she outsmarted the Grandmaster in one move. The fluorescent lights of Westbridge University's hallways flickered on at precisely 8:30 p.m., illuminating the empty corridors and classrooms that Ruth Carter would soon clean. She adjusted her gray uniform, the fabric worn at the edges from years of use, and pushed her cleaning cart forward with practiced ease. The squeaking wheel needed oil again, but Ruth had learned to find comfort in its familiar rhythm, a small symphony that accompanied her through the night. At 53, Ruth had perfected invisibility. Students walked past her without a glance, professors nodded politely, but forgotten her name seconds later, and administrators sometimes mistook her for other black staff members. 17 years of night shifts had trained her to move like a shadow through Westbridge's prestigious halls, her presence barely registering in the institution's collective consciousness. But tonight, like many nights before, Ruth's path would deliberately curve toward the eastern wing of the university's main building. Home to the Westbridge Chess Club, widely regarded as one of the most elite collegiate chess programs in the country. The chess room lights were still on as Ruth approached. The last session of the day was running late again. She slowed her cart, finding a reason to linger by the water fountain across from the open door. Inside, hunched over ornate wooden boards, sat 20 students in total concentration. Standing at the head of the room was Dr. Lionel Voss, Westbridge's chess program director and international grandmaster. "The Budapest Gambit," Dr. Voss was saying, his voice carrying the precise, clipped tones of someone accustomed to reverence, "is rarely played at high levels, because it gives white a slight advantage in controlling the center. But understanding its mechanics will prepare you for unconventional opponents." Ruth watched, her hands mechanically wiping down the fountain while her eyes tracked the demonstration board at the front of the room. Her lips moved silently, tracing each move as Voss manipulated the magnetic pieces. Even from this distance, she could see the position developing, could feel the tension building between the black and white armies. "Professor," a student with thick glasses called out, "wouldn't black's knight development here be premature?" "Indeed, Mr. Harrington. Excellent observation." Voss nodded approvingly. Such a move at the championship level would be catastrophic. Ruth's eyebrows furrowed slightly. She shifted her weight inadvertently, causing the cart to creak. Several heads turned. Dr. Voss paused mid-sentence, his gaze finding Ruth in the doorway. He said, his tone shifting to something cooler, more dismissive. "Maintenance is here early tonight." A few students snickered. Ruth quickly looked down, resuming her work on the fountain. "Perhaps she's come to learn some chess strategy," a female student whispered loudly enough to be heard, generating more laughter. Ruth pushed her cart forward, intending to move past the room, but Voss called out, "No need to rush off, we won't be much longer. Though I doubt our discussion holds much interest for you." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Ruth nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and continued down the hall. Behind her the chess discussion resumed, but not before she heard a male voice say, "Remember when she tried touching Jensen's board last semester? Never seen anyone so confused by a pawn." More laughter followed her down the corridor. Back in the janitorial closet, Ruth pulled out her worn leather bag from beneath a shelf of cleaning supplies. Sitting on an upturned bucket, she extracted a small magnetic chess set, the kind sold in airport gift shops. The pieces were discolored from years of handling, the board's hinges starting to separate. She set up the exact position she had observed on Voss's demonstration board, then played through the next several moves rapidly, her fingers dancing across the tiny squares. She paused at the knight development that the student had questioned. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. Then, instead of following Voss's correction, she made a different move. Then another, and another. A smile formed at the corners of her mouth. Later that night, in the university library that had long since emptied of students, Ruth quietly reshelved books in the reference section. Her cart was parked beside a table stacked with chess literature, obscure journals, tournament records, and theoretical texts that few bothered to read anymore in the age of online chess. "Mrs. Carter," a voice interrupted her work. It was Martin Gould, the elderly knight librarian who had shown her kindness over the years. "Still at it with the chess books, I see." Ruth smiled warmly at him. "Just catching up on some old friends, Mr. Gould." He glanced at the stack she'd assembled. "But Phoenix middle game strategies, heavy reading for most chess enthusiasts, let alone." He caught himself. "Let alone a janitor." Ruth finished for him, no bitterness in her tone. Martin looked embarrassed. I didn't mean. It's all right, she said, sliding a massive volume of annotated championship games back onto its shelf. People have assumptions. Always have. Did you ever play before? He gestured vaguely at her uniform. For a moment, something flickered across Ruth's face, a shadow of something deeper, more complex than her usual serene expression. Another life, she said quietly. Martin seemed to sense he'd touched on something private. He nodded respectfully and moved on to his own tasks, leaving Ruth alone with the chess books and her thoughts. Before leaving that night, Ruth passed by the chess room once more. It was dark now, but the door was unlocked. The student who closed up had been careless again. She slipped inside, turning on a single desk lamp that cast long shadows across the empty tables. Trophy cases lined the walls, gleaming with gold-plated chess pieces and championship cups. Photographs featured predominantly white men in formal attire, shaking hands over chessboards or receiving awards. Ruth approached the demonstration board, where Voss had lectured earlier. The position was still set up, the Budapest gambit variation they had been studying. With careful precision, she rearranged the pieces to show what would have happened if her knight development had been played. 7 moves later, White's king sat in an elegant trap, not checkmate yet but inescapably doomed. Ruth stared at the board for a long moment, then meticulously returned the pieces to their original position. As she turned to leave, her gaze fell on a newly hung portrait near the door. Lionel Voss at the World Chess Federation Gala, receiving recognition for his contributions to chess theory. Below it, a small plaque read, Dr. Lionel Voss, International Grandmaster. Elevating minds recognizing greatness, Ruth turned off the lamp and closed the door carefully behind her. The empty hallway stretched before her, silent except for the squeak of her cart's wheel as she pushed it forward into the darkness. Tomorrow would be another day of invisibility. Another day of silence. Another day of chess problems solved in secret. Or so everyone thought. Westbridge University's annual Chess Invitational transformed the normally quiet campus into a battleground of intellect. Banners hung from the stone facade of the main building, announcing the prestigious event in bold crimson letters. Players from universities across the country filled the common areas, some practicing speed chess on portable boards, others hunched over chess theory books with furrowed brows. For Ruth, the event meant additional cleaning shifts and more scrutiny. The administration wanted every surface spotless, every floor gleaming. These are world-class competitors, her supervisor had emphasized. The university's reputation is at stake. Ruth moved through the crowded hallways with her cart, somehow even more invisible than usual despite the crush of visitors. Chess enthusiasts were too engrossed in discussions of Sicilian defenses and queen's gambits to notice her. She preferred it this way, especially today. The preliminary rounds had begun in multiple rooms throughout the building. Ruth carefully avoided the main tournament hall where Dr. Voss would be overseeing matches, instead focusing on cleaning the adjacent corridors. But as afternoon faded into evening, her janitorial route inevitably led to Practice Room B, where several Westbridge students were analyzing their earlier games. Ruth paused outside the door, listening to the animated discussion inside. She recognized Voss's authoritative tone as he critiqued a student's play. Your problem, Miss Chen, was hesitation. The Budapest variation requires absolute commitment. Uncertainty is fatal in chess, and in life. Yes, Professor, came a quiet female voice. Ruth took a deep breath and knocked softly before entering with her cart. The room fell momentarily silent as she moved toward the wastebaskets that needed emptying. 6 students sat around tables with chessboards, while Voss stood at the front with his arms crossed. All eyes followed her movements. Just emptying the trash, Ruth murmured, keeping her eyes downcast. By all means, Voss said with exaggerated politeness. Though I do recommend watching where you step this time. Chess pieces don't respond well to being knocked over. Several students snickered. Ruth felt heat rise to her face as she remembered the incident from months ago, when a student had deliberately extended his foot as she passed, causing her to stumble against the table and disrupt a game in progress. The room had erupted in laughter then, with Voss making a show of rescuing the expensive wooden pieces from her clumsy hands. Ruth continued her task silently, moving efficiently between trash bins. She was nearly finished when a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. Dr. Voss? A young man burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. Grandmaster Petrov has arrived early and wants to meet with you before tomorrow's exhibition match. Voss straightened his already impeccable blazer. Of course, I suspected he might. Tell him I'll be there directly. Pride radiated from his face. Being singled out by the legendary Russian Grandmaster was clearly a significant honor. The room buzzed with renewed energy. Several students gathered their things, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous chess player. In the excitement, a chessboard near the edge of the table was jostled, sending pieces scattering across the floor. Ruth immediately knelt to help collect them, her hands moving automatically toward the fallen chess pieces. Don't touch those, a red-haired student named Jensen snapped, slapping her hand away. Those are handcrafted ebony pieces, they're worth more than you make in a month. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Ruth pulled her hand back as if burned. She looked up to find Voss watching the interaction with cold amusement in his eyes. Perhaps, he said with deliberate slowness, Mrs. Carter has secret chess abilities we're all unaware of. More laughter, though a few students shifted uncomfortably. Well? Voss continued, warming to his mockery. Since you seem so interested in our games, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your skill? Show us how it's done? Ruth began to rise, intending to leave without engaging. But Voss stepped forward, blocking her path to the door. Come now, he insisted, his voice carrying a sharp edge beneath its false joviality. One quick game before we meet Grandmaster Petrov. It would be educational for everyone. He gestured toward an empty chair beside a freshly set board. The air in the room thickened with tension. Several students exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others leaned forward with malicious curiosity. Jensen smirked openly, already anticipating the entertainment of watching the janitor fumble with the rules of chess. Ruth stood still, her eyes fixed on the gleaming chess pieces. Black and white arranged in perfect opposition, each with its place, its purpose, its power. Something shifted in her expression, so subtle that only the most observant person would have noticed the straightening of her shoulders, the slight lift of her chin. Unless, Voss added, his smile never reaching his eyes, you'd prefer to stick to what you know best. The broom closet is down the hall. Ms. Chen, the quiet student from earlier, looked down at her hands. Two other students laughed nervously. The rest waited, suspended in the moment's cruelty. Ruth looked directly at Voss for the first time, really looked at him. Her gaze was neither angry nor intimidated, but evaluating, measuring. Behind her eyes, calculations were already spinning, positions materializing. One game, she said quietly, the sound of her voice surprising everyone in the room. Voss blinked, clearly not expecting her to accept the challenge. A flash of something annoyance, concern, crossed his face before his arrogant smile returned. One game it is, he announced, gesturing grandly for her to sit. I'll even let you play black. It seems appropriate. Ruth set her cleaning supplies aside and slowly took the offered seat. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, but still graceful, hovered above the obsidian pieces. In the harsh fluorescent light, her wedding ring, a simple band she still wore 13 years after her husband's death, caught the light briefly. Should I explain the rules first? Voss asked, drawing more chuckles from his audience, which had now grown as word spread through the hallway. Nearly 20 people crowded the room, whispering and pointing. Ruth looked at the board, then at Voss, and finally at the growing audience of students and chess players. No need, she said softly. I believe I remember how the pieces move. Voss raised an eyebrow, then reached for his white pawn. Let's not waste Grandmaster Petrov's time, he said dismissively. This won't take long. The room fell into expectant silence as Dr. Voss moved his king's pawn forward 2 squares. The most common opening in chess. His movements were performative, designed to impress. He adjusted the piece with unnecessary precision, then pressed the timer with a flourish. Ruth's response came without hesitation. Her hand moved with quiet efficiency, advancing her king's pawn to face Voss's. No wasted motion, no dramatic pause. Voss smiled condescendingly. The mirror defense? Beginner's choice. But Ruth wasn't finished. After Voss moved his knight to f3, she pushed her pawn to e5, the standard beginning of the Budapest gambit that Voss had been lecturing about earlier that week. A few students exchanged glances, surprised she knew even this much. Voss captured the offered pawn with mechanical confidence, accepting the gambit. Now, if you've been paying attention while dusting our bookshelves, you should develop your knight. His voice trailed off as Ruth's hand moved to an unexpected piece. Instead of developing her knight to f6 as the traditional Budapest demanded, she slid her bishop to c5, leaving her knight in its original position. Confusion flickered across Voss's face. That's not the Budapest. No, Ruth said softly, her first words since the game began. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Voss's eyebrows drew together as he studied the position. After a moment's consideration, he moved his knight to capture another pawn at d5, a greedy but theoretically sound choice against an amateur. Ruth's response was immediate. Her knight sprang to f6, but with a subtle difference in timing from the standard variation. The position now resembled a hybrid of the Budapest and Vienna game, a rare sideline that even experienced players seldom encountered. Voss leaned forward, his earlier smirk fading. His next move came more slowly, bishop to c4, developing while threatening Ruth's weak f7 square. What happened next caused the first genuine stir among the spectators. Ruth developed her remaining knight to t6, but then, after Voss's next move, she calmly repositioned her queen to h4, a move that appeared to violate opening principles by exposing the queen too early. Check, she said quietly. Jensen snorted. Amateur mistake, everyone knows not to bring the queen out early. But the graduate students in the room had fallen silent, their eyes fixed on the board. Something unusual was happening with the position. Voss's king was suddenly under pressure in a way that felt strange, unexpected. Voss blocked the check with his knight, moving it to e2. His hand lingered on the piece, uncertainty evident in the tension of his fingers. Ruth's response was a quiet bishop to g4, pinning the knight to Voss's queen. The threat wasn't immediately catastrophic, but it further restricted Voss's options. The room had grown completely silent now. Even Jensen had stopped making comments. Everyone sensed the shift in momentum. 6 moves into the game, and Voss, a grandmaster with 30 years of tournament experience, was on the defensive against the university janitor. Interesting, Voss muttered, his voice tight. He spent nearly 3 minutes considering his position before castling kingside, seeking safety. Ruth's next move came without hesitation. Knight to g4, attacking the undefended pawn at h2 while maintaining pressure on Voss's pinned knight. A graduate student in the back whispered audibly. That's Mortensen's variation from the '93 Budapest Invitational. But she's improved the move order. Voss's head snapped up, his eyes darting from the student back to Ruth, then to the board. Sweat had appeared on his forehead. His next move, he free to attack the knight, came after another long pause. Ruth captured the pawn at h2 with her knight. Check, she said again, still in that same quiet voice. The king was forced to move to a1, its only legal square. Ruth's bishop slid to f3, threatening the queen and creating multiple unstoppable threats. Voss stared at the board in naked disbelief. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Every line, every variation led to the same outcome. In 2 more moves, his king would be checkmated or he would suffer catastrophic material loss. A younger professor standing nearby suddenly gasped. It's mate in 3. There's no defense. Voss's face flushed crimson. Impossible, he hissed, but his trembling fingers betrayed his understanding of the position. For the first time, Ruth looked up from the board and met his gaze directly. No triumph in her eyes, no vindication, only a calm certainty that had been there from the beginning. Voss reached out and tipped over his king with a shaking hand, the universal signal of resignation. The white piece rolled slightly before settling on its side in defeat. The room erupted in chaos. Students pressed forward to see the final position. Phones appeared as people snapped pictures of the board. Questions overlapped into unintelligible noise. Who is she? Did she just beat Voss in 7 moves? That's impossible. That variation isn't in any book. Through the commotion, Ruth stood silently. She straightened the pieces on her side of the board with careful fingers, then rose from her chair. The crowd instinctively parted before her, creating a path to the door. Voss remained seated, staring at the fallen king as if it had betrayed him personally. His reputation, built on decades of academic posturing and tournament victories against carefully selected opponents, lay in ruins alongside the piece. "Wait," called a thin young man with thick glasses and a laptop under his arm. "Please. What's your name?" Ruth paused at the door, her hand already reaching for her abandoned cleaning cart. "Ruth Carter," she said simply. The young man was already typing furiously. "The variation you played, it has elements of an unpublished trap attributed to a prodigy from the early 90s who vanished from competition. The annotations only show the player's initials." A heavy silence fell over the room as connections began forming in people's minds. Ruth offered no confirmation, no explanation. She merely nodded once, then pushed her cart into the hallway and continued her rounds, leaving behind a room full of chess players frozen in collective shock. As she disappeared down the corridor, the whispering began, rumors and questions spreading through the tournament halls faster than Ruth could polish the floors. By morning, nothing at Westbridge University would be the same. Especially not for Dr. Lionel Voss. By morning, Ruth Carter's name had spread through Westbridge University, like wildfire. Students who had never noticed her presence now searched the hallways, hoping to catch a glimpse of the janitor who had humiliated their celebrated chess director. The university's online forum buzzed with speculation and hastily assembled biographies, most wildly inaccurate. But one post shared by Marcus Wong, the thin young man with the laptop who had recognized her strategy, gained particular attention. His analysis of the game, complete with annotations revealing the brilliance of Ruth's unconventional variation, had been viewed over 20,000 times overnight. The trap executed by Ruth Carter bears unmistakable similarities to a legendary sequence, attributed to an American prodigy known only as RC, who briefly dominated collegiate chess in the early 1990s. His post concluded, "If this is the same person, we may have witnessed the return of one of the greatest tactical minds in modern chess history." In the university's administrative offices, the atmosphere had shifted from confusion to crisis management. Dean Harrington, a silver-haired man with a perpetual frown, sat across from his assistant, staring at an ancient file retrieved from the archives. "This can't be happening," he muttered, flipping through yellowed newspaper clippings. 30 years buried, and now this. His assistant peered at a faded photograph paper clipped to the file, a young black woman in graduation regalia, holding a chess trophy and smiling broadly. "It's definitely her, sir. Ruth Carter. She was a mathematics student here on full scholarship from Dean Harrington's phone buzzed incessantly with messages from board members, alumni, and reporters. He ignored them all, fixated on a particular document buried deep in the file, a formal complaint filed by Ruth Carter against Professor William Stanton, then head of the mathematics department and chair of the chess program. "Harassment, discrimination, and academic sabotage," the assistant read aloud. She claimed Stanton revoked her scholarship after she defeated him in the Northeastern Collegiate Championship. A claim that was thoroughly investigated and dismissed. Harrington snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. The official finding was that Miss Carter plagiarized portions of her thesis on game theory applications in chess. The assistant raised an eyebrow. "And now Dr. Voss holds Stanton's former position." Voss was Stanton's protege, Harrington acknowledged, massaging his temples. "This is a public relations nightmare." In a small apartment 15 miles from campus, Ruth sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and reading through dozens of emails that had somehow found their way to her long-abandoned university account. Most were from chess publications requesting interviews, but several came from former classmates who had witnessed the original scandal. "I always knew Stanton fabricated those plagiarism charges," one wrote. "He couldn't stand being beaten by a black woman from the wrong side of Chicago." Ruth's phone rang, the 7th call that morning from an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. A knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Martin Gould, the night librarian, holding a small potted plant. "I hope you don't mind," he said when she opened the door. "The security guard gave me your address. I thought you might like some company today." Ruth smiled tiredly and invited him in. Her apartment was small but meticulously organized, with one wall dedicated entirely to bookshelves filled with chess literature. "So it's true," Martin said, noticing the books. "I suspected for years, but didn't want to pry." Ruth placed his plant, a small peace lily, on her windowsill. "Most people see what they expect to see," A black woman in a cleaning uniform doesn't register as a potential chess genius. The internet is exploding with your game against Voss, Martin said, accepting the tea Ruth offered. Some blogger discovered you were the Ruth Carter who won the Chicago City Championship at 16. Then dominated collegiate chess until my career and education were destroyed by a powerful man who couldn't accept defeat, Ruth finished quietly. Yes, that's me. What happened? Martin asked gently. The official record is incomplete. Ruth sat down heavily, her shoulders sagging under the weight of memories long suppressed. I was a mathematics prodigy from the south side of Chicago. Chess was my ticket out. When I came to Westbridge on scholarship, I thought I'd found my path. Professor Stanton was initially supportive until I started winning consistently. Against him, against everyone. She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. After I defeated him in the championship, things changed. First came the inappropriate advances. When I rejected those, he claimed to have discovered plagiarism in my thesis. It was fabricated, of course, but his word against mine. And Voss? Martin prompted. Stanton's favorite student. He witnessed everything and said nothing. Then inherited Stanton's position when he retired. The chess world is small and has a long memory for certain kinds of grudges. Martin shook his head in disgust. What will you do now? There's talk of an investigation. Before Ruth could answer, her phone chimed with an email notification. She glanced at it and went very still. The president of the university wants to meet with me, she said, disbelief coloring her voice. Immediately, across campus, Dr. Lionel Voss locked the door to his office, ignoring the crowd of students and reporters gathered outside. His hands shook as he poured himself a generous measure of scotch from the bottle he kept in his bottom drawer. On his computer screen, an email from the university president indicated that his presence was urgently requested at a meeting that afternoon. Next to it, a chess forum displayed posts analyzing his humiliating defeat, with titles like Grandmaster exposed the Budapest trap that ended a career. But what truly terrified him was the third tab, an archived email from 30 years ago that had somehow leaked online. The message from William Stanton to Voss, then a graduate student, read, Lionel, I need your help. The Carter girl has become problematic. I've attached a document with highlighted sections from published papers. We need to incorporate these into her thesis files before the academic review. This stays between us. W.F. Voss drained his glass, his career and reputation crumbling around him, as Ruth Carter's truth finally surfaced from decades of deliberate burial. The president's office at Westbridge University had been designed to intimidate, mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound academic journals, walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced former presidents, and a massive desk that forced visitors to look up at whoever sat behind it. Ruth had cleaned this room hundreds of times but had never been invited to sit in one of its plush leather chairs. President Gloria Chen, the first woman and first person of color to lead Westbridge in its 18-7-year history, did not sit behind the imposing desk. Instead, she welcomed Ruth at the door and guided her to a small conference table in the corner. Mrs. Carter, she began, I want to personally apologize for the way you've been treated, both recently and it seems, historically, by this institution. Ruth sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. The janitorial uniform she wore seemed deliberately chosen today, a silent reminder of 30 years of injustice. President Chen continued. An independent investigation has been launched into the allegations regarding your scholarship and thesis from 1993. The Board of Trustees met in emergency session this morning after certain documents were leaked online. You mean Professor Stanton's email confessing to framing me for plagiarism? Ruth said calmly. President Chen's surprise was visible. You've seen it? The whole world has seen it by now, Dr. Chen. The chess community is surprisingly efficient at spreading information. Outside the window, Ruth could see camera crews setting up on the main quad. 3 decades ago, her dismissal had been a small story, quickly buried. Today her vindication was drawing national attention. Dr. Voss has submitted his resignation, effective immediately, President Chen said. His involvement in Professor Stanton's actions is deeply troubling. Ruth nodded but said nothing. Voss's career ending brought her no joy, only a hollow sense that justice had been delayed far too long. We would like to offer you an honorary position at the university. President Chen continued, pushing a folder across the table. And establish a scholarship fund in your name for underprivileged students with exceptional talent in mathematics or chess. Ruth didn't touch the folder. And what would my responsibilities be in this honorary position? Public appearances at university events, perhaps occasional lectures on chess theory. We'd like to highlight your connection to Westbridge in a more appropriate manner. The careful diplomatic language wasn't lost on Ruth. After 30 years of invisibility, the university now wanted to parade her as evidence of their commitment to diversity and redemption. I see, she said, finally opening the folder. The proposed compensation was substantial, enough to retire comfortably. The attached press release described her as Westbridge's own chess prodigy, returning to her rightful place in the academic community. President Chen leaned forward. We can never fully make amends for what happened, Mrs. Carter. But this is a start. And my academic record, the false plagiarism charge, already expunged. We're prepared to award you the degree you earned, with full honors. Ruth closed the folder. 30 years ago, I wanted nothing more than that degree. I dreamt of becoming a professor, of combining my love of mathematics with chess theory. That dream was taken from me by men who couldn't stand being outplayed by someone they considered beneath them. President Chen nodded solemnly. And now I need time to consider what I want, not what Westbridge wants from me. By evening, Ruth's story had gone viral. Chess forums overflowed with analysis of her victory over Voss, while mainstream media latched onto the narrative of long-delayed justice. Ruth Carter trended on social media platforms, alongside hashtags like Chess Queen and Justice Served. Outside her apartment building, reporters gathered in growing numbers. Inside, Ruth's phone continued its relentless buzzing with interview requests, chess tournament invitations, and even book deal offers. A text message from Martin Gould provided rare comfort. Whatever you decide, remember you've already won the most important game. Ruth smiled at that, then nearly dropped her phone when she saw the next notification. An email from International Grandmaster Elena Petrova, the current women's world champion. Your Budapest variation was brilliant. The chess world has missed your mind for too long. When you're ready to play again, call me. A knock at her door revealed her building manager, looking harried. Mrs. Carter, there's a young woman downstairs insisting on seeing you. Says she's a student at Westbridge. I can send her away. Name? Ruth asked. Chen. Lisa Chen. Ruth recognized the name immediately. The quiet student Voss had been criticizing before the fateful game. Send her up. Minutes later, Lisa Chen stood awkwardly in Ruth's living room, clutching a chess book to her chest. I'm sorry to intrude, Mrs. Carter. I needed to thank you. For what? For showing me it's possible to fight back. Lisa's eyes shone with unshed tears. Dr. Voss has been undermining my confidence for 2 years, telling me I don't have the natural intuition for chess. That women rarely achieve greatness in the game. When you beat him, it was like watching the future change. Ruth gestured for Lisa to sit. He was wrong about you, just as Stanton was wrong about me. There are others, Lisa said hesitantly. Other students who've been dismissed or discouraged. We've started a group chat. Everyone's talking about you, about what happened. And we want to learn from you, not just chess, but how to survive in spaces that weren't built for us. Ruth studied the young woman, seeing in her a reflection of her younger self. Brilliant and vulnerable, in a world designed to exclude her. For 30 years Ruth had protected herself by becoming invisible. Now visibility was being thrust upon her, whether she wanted it or not. The university offered me a position, Ruth said finally, an honorary role. Lisa nodded. I heard, the whole campus is buzzing about it. What would you do, if you were me? Lisa considered this seriously. I think I'd take their money and their platform, but use it my way. Not as their token, but as a force for change. She hesitated, then added, we need you, Mrs. Carter. Not just as a symbol, but as a teacher. Ruth walked to her bookshelf and pulled down a worn copy of Chess Fundamentals by Capablanca. She had purchased it secondhand as a teenager, saving her lunch money for weeks. The most important lesson in chess, she said, handing the book to Lisa, is that every piece has value. Even the pawn, often overlooked, often sacrificed, can transform if it crosses the entire board. Lisa clutched the book, understanding the metaphor. Will you help us? As Ruth considered her answer, her phone buzzed with yet another call from the university president's office. Eager for her decision. 2 weeks after defeating Dr. Voss, Ruth Carter stood before the door of Westbridge University's chess club room, her hand hesitating on the handle. The plaque that once bore Lionel Voss's name had been removed, leaving small screw holes in the polished wood. In its place hung a temporary printed sign, Chess Studies Department, Director TBA. Ruth took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, every seat was taken. Students sat shoulder to shoulder, some on chairs, others cross-legged on the floor when space ran out. At least 60 people had crammed into a room designed for 30. When Ruth entered, a hush fell over the crowd. Lisa Chen stood up from the front row. Professor Carter is here. Ruth had finally accepted the university's offer, but with conditions entirely her own. No honorary position. She demanded a real one, with a real salary and real influence. No tokenized appearances at donor events, but the freedom to restructure the chess program from its foundation. The board of trustees, desperate to avoid further scandal, had conceded to every demand. Not professor yet, Ruth corrected gently. My master's thesis needs to be resubmitted and defended first. She placed her worn leather bag on the desk at the front of the room, the same desk where Voss had once lectured, and surveyed the room. Faces of every color, gender and background looked back at her. Many she recognized from cleaning their study spaces late at night. Others were completely new, students from different departments drawn by her story, her game, her sudden emergence as a symbol of perseverance and delayed justice. I understand this isn't a regular class, Ruth began. No one's receiving credit for being here today. You've all come voluntarily. She pulled a piece of chalk from her pocket, not the whiteboard markers that had replaced chalkboards in most university classrooms, but actual chalk. With deliberate strokes, she wrote on the board, "It only takes one move." Chess is not just a game of intelligence, Ruth continued, turning to face her audience. It's a game of patience, of seeing beyond what's immediately visible, of understanding that sometimes a seemingly small action can change everything. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old wooden chess piece, a black queen, worn smooth from years of handling. This was the first chess piece I ever owned. My father carved it for me when I was 7 years old, before he knew the correct shape of a queen. It's imperfect, but it taught me the most important move in the game. A young man in the back raised his hand. Is this about your Budapest variation? The one you used against Dr. Voss? Ruth smiled. No. This is about something much more fundamental. The willingness to make a move when everyone expects you to remain still. To advance when they expect retreat. To speak when they expect silence. She set the wooden queen on the demonstration board. 30 years ago, I made a mistake after being framed for plagiarism. I retreated from the board entirely. I allowed others to define my value and my place. I became exactly what they expected. Invisible. The room was completely silent now, every person leaning forward slightly. My victory against Dr. Voss wasn't about a clever trap or a brilliant combination. Ruth continued. It was about reclaiming my voice, my space on the board. That's the lesson I want to teach here, more important than any opening theory or endgame technique. Martin Gould, standing quietly at the back of the room, nodded encouragingly. Ruth walked to a large object in the corner, covered with a cloth. She pulled the covering away to reveal a bronze plaque mounted on dark wood, an artistic rendering of the final position from her game against Voss with an inscription below it. Ruth Carter vs. Dr. Lionel Voss, Westbridge University, 2025. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply to take your rightful place. President Chen asked me where I'd like this displayed. Ruth said. I chose here, not as a celebration of victory over one man, but as a reminder that no position is hopeless if you refuse to accept defeat. Lisa Chen stood again. Will you teach us your Budapest variation now? Ruth laughed. A warm, genuine sound that many present had never heard from her before. Eventually. But chess theory isn't what you most need to learn from me. She began passing out simple paper chessboards and pieces to everyone in the room. Today we start with the basics, not just how the pieces move, but why they move. Not just the rules, but the courage to play your own game. As students paired up and began setting up their boards, Ruth moved among them, adjusting positions, answering questions, seeing herself reflected in their eager faces, especially those who, like her, had been told explicitly or implicitly that they didn't belong in such spaces. A university photographer slipped in, capturing images for the press release announcing Ruth's appointment. She ignored the camera, focused entirely on a young woman struggling to remember how the night moved. Like this, Ruth demonstrated. The night is the only piece that can jump over others. Never forget that. Sometimes the only way forward is to leap over barriers others have placed in your path. Outside the window, workers were mounting a new permanent sign beside the door. It would read Ruth Carter Chess Center for Excellence and Inclusion. But Ruth's attention remained on her students, the future grandmasters, professors and change-makers who might never have found their way to chess without seeing someone who looked like them succeed against overwhelming odds. At the back of the room, a janitor paused while pushing his cart past the open door. Ruth looked up and caught his eye, offering a smile of recognition and respect. One invisible worker to another. He nodded back before continuing on his rounds. Some patterns were already changing, others would take time. Ruth returned to the front of the room and picked up her father's handmade queen, feeling its familiar weight in her palm. The piece that could move in any direction, overcome any obstacle, transform the entire board with a single decisive action. "Let's begin," she said, and 60 pairs of hands reached for their kings and queens, ready to learn the game that had the power to change far more than just the pieces on the board.